Amen. Thank you, Liz. Welcome. Good to see you today. Great to have you worshiping with us. If you're here today for the first time, a special welcome to you. Glad to have you here in this it's a beautiful day, but a little bit of a blustery day the last couple of days. We've had a lot happening since we last met last Sunday. We had a great soup supper on Monday evening, and we're looking forward to one more tomorrow night. So we're kind of closing out that soup supper series and hope that some of you might make that a part of your Monday tomorrow night as well. And then Friday evening we showed our film From the Quarters to Lincoln Heights, and very well attended. The place was full, and just hats off to Ray and Sue Kermode and many other people who were part of the anti-racism task force who really got the word out to different churches and out into the community so that people could come and be a part of that. I understand the question and answer time went for quite a while as well. So big thanks to all those who made that happen. Today as we worship, we're continuing our Lenten sermon series on being formed and reformed. The Reformation and Martin Luther, that series continues, and today we're really looking at how we find that place of rest or that place of refuge in our lives, because sometimes our lives are pretty chaotic. That certainly was true in Martin Luther's life, and it's true of our lives as well. So that'll be our theme as we worship together today. Again, it's great to have you here. We like to say, whoever you are and wherever you are in your journey of faith, you are welcome here. I'm going to invite you to stand right now so we can move right into our music today. Our band's ready. Let's stand and sing.
So aimless, life filled with sin, I wouldn't ask my dear Savior in. Then Jesus came like a stranger in the night. Praise the Lord, I saw the light, I saw the light, I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. Just like a blind man, I wandered alone. Worries and fears I claimed on my own. Then like the blind man gave back his sight. Praise the Lord, I saw the light, I saw the light, I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. Well, I was a fool to wander astray, for straight is the gate and narrow the way. Now I have traded the wrong for the right. Praise the Lord, I saw the light, I saw the light, I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. Day by day, I wake to your wonders. So many ways, so many colors. Each time I look around, I see your face round and round. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you. way. Still I know by your side I'll always stay. When my life goes tumbling down, you pick me up off the ground. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't imagine living without you. There is nobody loves me like you do. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't imagine living without you. There is nobody loves me like you do. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop.
That was wonderful music, team. Thank you so much. Good morning and welcome. I'm Heather Hennessy, your worship leader today, and it's wonderful to have you with us. Please take a moment to fill out one of our registration forms. They are located in the white binders at the end of your pews. Fill that out, send it on down the row, and let us know that you're here. Also inside those white binders are name tags, and we invite you to write out your name and put one of those on. It's so helpful to each of us as we get to know each other and maintain our relationships. As you exit through the back doors today, our restrooms will be off on your left, just down the hall, on the left. Rhiannon, our wonderful administrative assistant, will be downstairs after service today. She has new directories on hand if you didn't receive one last week. And as always, we invite all of you to join us downstairs for a time of coffee, snacks, and fellowship in our social hall immediately following our worship service this morning. And now, here's Pastor Joe to tell us about some other happenings in our community of faith.
Thank you, Heather. Well, as I mentioned right at the beginning there, our last Lenten Soup Supper will be tomorrow evening. We gather at 5:30 in the social hall. We are done usually 6:45, around 7 really is when we're usually done. These have been good times of sharing a meal together and having some further discussion about the themes that we're lifting up here on Sunday morning. So we invite you to be a part of that in the social hall tomorrow evening, 5:30. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday, so we're looking forward to that, our celebration of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem. We invite you to be a part of that next week, and then, of course, we'll have a full slate of Holy Week activities the following week. There is an advance, a newsletter coming out this week. You're going to see a full lineup of everything that's happening during Holy Week. You'll also see there in your bulletin, you'll see that there's a class on Alzheimer's disease that's going to be offered by two of our members, Patty Jones and Andy McClure, are going to run that class. There's lots of folks that have know people or are dealing with people that are struggling with either dementia or Alzheimer's, and this will be an informative class. It's going to be on Wednesdays. Well, you can see it there. I think it's 4 to 5 on Wednesday afternoons, down in room 1011, which is right off the parking lot there. There is a sign up for that class so that they have a sense of how many people are interested in attending. The other thing that's happening this coming week is we're going to be having a memorial service for Karen Byrne. Karen was a longtime member here, part of our chancel choir, one of our lay leaders, one of our worship leaders. The memorial for Karen will be this coming Friday, March 31st at 11 o'clock, 11 in the morning. And it'll be right here in the sanctuary. There'll be a reception following. We hope you can join us to celebrate the life of Karen Byrne. Also, the Lily order forms are the forms in your bulletins or not? Okay, we put them in last week, so they're in the back. And go ahead, and if you want to order a lily in memory or in honor of a loved one for Easter Day, these lilies will be up front here on Easter morning. And just fill one of those forms out and get it back to the office, I believe, by next Sunday, April 2nd. I think that's it for right now. I'm going to invite Christine and our children forward right now for their special time. Kids, come on down. Amen. So they're going to be heading off to Wonder Years, and as they head to Wonder Years, we're going to move into the singing of a hymn, great hymn, "Sing Praise to God Who Reigns Above." It's number 126 in your hymnal. But if you don't want to use the hymnal, you can see the words right up behind me. Let's stand together, sing praise to God who reigns above.
Sing praise to God who reigns above, the God of all creation, the God of power, the God of love, the God of our salvation. With healing balm my soul is filled, and every faithless murmur still. To God all praise and glory. The Lord is never far away, but through all grief distressing, and ever present help and stay, power, peace, and joy and blessing. As with a mother's tender hand, God gently leads the chosen band. To God all praise and glory. Thus all my toils some way along, I sing aloud thy praises, that earth may hear the grateful song, my voice unwearied praises. Keep joyful in the Lord my heart, both soul and body bear your part. To God all praise and glory.
We have a brief but meaningful passage this morning from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 30 through 34. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns, and they arrived ahead of them. And so as he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and Jesus had compassion for them because they were like a sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. The word of God for the people of God.
Thank you, Heather. I've told many of you before that, am I on? Yeah. I've told many of you before that when I was in Boy Scouts, when I was a kid, I was in Boy Scouts, and I belonged to a troop that sort of had a special purpose. We were a backpacking troop. That was kind of the character, the sort of special function of this troop. Our scoutmaster was an avid backpacker, and he was determined that we would be a backpacking troop. And in fact, he wanted our troop to be sort of known throughout the Bay Area as the backpacking troop, right? In order to achieve this distinction, word of mouth distinction, I guess you'd say, he decided that we were basically going on a backpack trip every single month, year round. And each of those backpack trips was probably 8 to 12 miles, right? And once a month. And, I was as gung-ho as the next guy, but back in those days, I was kind of small back then, and, kind of scrawny. Thankfully, I've bulked up a lot since then, but frankly, no matter how much weight I tried to shed from that pack, it was quite a load for me. You know, they do all the calculations, you know, less than 20% of your weight and all that. You know, I probably weighed about 100 pounds at that point. And soon a strange pattern began to develop. Each month our troop would start their backpack, and within, an hour, there'd be 20 boys spread out for about a mile in a single file line on the trail, having more trouble than most. I usually found myself near the end of the line. The strange pattern was that on every hike, there would be 2 or 3 significant rest stops. And the entire troop would stop and rest, sometimes for 5 or 10 minutes. Sometimes we'd leave our packs on. Every so often, it'd be long enough we'd take them off. But being near the end, I would usually just reach the rest stop, where many of the others had been resting for 7 or 8 minutes, and the leader would decide that that was the time to get going again. And I'd be thinking, what is going on here? What's up with that? The group starts up again, and I'd often had less than a minute of rest. Sometimes our lives are like that. We focus completely on whatever it is, the task at hand, school, work, getting the car fixed, staying on top of emails, details of our job, keeping the house running, the lawn mowed, the bills paid, so much so that many of us feel that before we even get a moment of rest, we have to resume. We have to continue. We have to keep on continuing, or we'll fall behind. The disciples needed some time off. The disciples needed some downtime. At least that's what it sounds like to me when I read the passage that Heather shared with us today. Those who followed Jesus, they worked hard. They were hard workers. They were out there with people, teaching people, interacting with people with physical, mental, emotional needs. They were trying to care for those people, and it was draining. It was draining to them. And Jesus recognized this. He knew they had a need for renewal. So he says to them, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. Unfortunately, for some of those of you who know the story, you know that as soon as they reached that deserted place, the people had gone ahead of them. The disciples didn't really find the peace they were looking for. Jesus and his disciples remind me of backpackers, those at the end of the line, who get to their place of rest and then discover that it's not there anymore. Can we find a place of rest, a place in this world where, as Jesus says, we can rest a while? Today we are continuing our series looking at the life of Martin Luther, a German monk who lived back in the 1500s. When we last, as I've said previously, if you haven't been to our previous worship services over the last few weeks, you can go and see them online to kind of get the backstory to all of this. But when we last talked about Martin Luther last week, he had spoken and written forcefully against the Catholic practices of that time back in the 1500s. Not just the indulgences, which we've been talking about, but language being used for the Mass and how the church was practicing communion at that time and how the common people were being left out. In the spring of 1521, Luther was ordered to appear before a tribunal, and he was asked by King Charles, will you recant? Will you recant, he says. That means, will you renounce these things that you've said and the things that you've written? Luther came back the next day and said, I cannot and will not recant anything. God help me, here I stand. That's kind of his famous line. Here I stand. I cannot do otherwise. Now, most of us have seen plenty of movies where someone speaks out against the king, and, just like Martin Luther did, and, you picture the king sitting up on his throne. The king says, take him away, off with his head, something like that, out of here. Why didn't that happen here? Why didn't that happen? Well, because a special deal had been worked out, whereby it was arranged that Luther would come before the king in this tribunal, but no matter how he pleaded, he would be given some freedom. He would be allowed to return back to his home in Wittenberg, no matter what the outcome. But of course, once the thing was over, all bets were off. because Luther had not disavowed his writings or his teachings. An edict, the next day after this tribunal, the next day an edict, a decision against him, was almost immediately put out, and whatever their version of a warrant was issued for his arrest. So as Luther is now traveling back to the town of Wittenberg, a group of horsemen rode up, and overtook the group that he was traveling with, and they kidnapped Martin Luther and carried him away. And it would appear at this point in Luther's life that it was all over. Maybe there was kind of a bounty on his head, so to speak, and these horsemen rode up and went off with him. Now, one of the people I haven't said much about during this sermon series is a man that Luther knew, whose name was Frederick the Wise. Frederick was an elector, meaning that he was one of the people in that region who voted to elect emperors in the Holy Roman Empire. And that meant he had quite a bit of clout and power among the ruling class in Germany, and also clout and power with the Vatican. Frederick the Wise had founded the university in Wittenberg where Martin Luther was teaching. Frederick liked Martin Luther. He used his privilege and his power to help Luther many times during his life. As Martin Luther was supposedly kidnapped, it was actually Frederick the Wise who had sent a posse to intercept Luther's group and bring him to safety. And after all, with this edict, as I said, this edict that was out, there was now a price on his head, so to speak. In other words, it was a fake kidnapping. They wanted it to appear as though Luther had been taken, but they actually took Luther to a place of safety called Wartburg Castle, where Luther spent most of the next year essentially in hiding. He stopped wearing his monk's clothing during that time. He grew out his hair and he let his beard grow, and he kind of wanted to blend in with the knights who were living at Wartburg Castle. So even though this was for Luther's own safety, this was not his idea. He didn't know about it ahead of time. It was definitely a forced exile. We might call it a time of forced retreat, right? The author of our book uses this episode to ask us to think about the times of refuge that we have encountered in our lives. No matter what word we use for it, refuge is all about growth and renewal. One of our ongoing themes in this sermon series is that God forms us and God reforms us throughout our lives. And refuge is part of that reformation. It's not about quitting. It's not about giving up, avoiding, ignoring. Pastor Rob Fuquay writes this: sometimes getting away to a place of refuge turns into hiding. Rather than replenishing, it becomes avoiding. We find ourselves retreating to get away from things we don't like to face. This is not refuge, he said. This is putting off responsibility. That's not what he's talking about here. And so that is a big caution for each of us, I think. But Luther did not feel that way. Luther was actually worried about all the things that weren't getting done, the things he wasn't doing during that time. He wrote, "I did not want to come here. I wanted to be in the fray." Meaning he wanted to be in the thick of it, right? He wanted to be in the thick of the battle and kind of coming forward with these Reformation ideas that he had sort of put into motion. Every so often, we are forced into refuge, and we need to open ourselves to what God would have us do during that time. These last couple of days, I've been down in San Jose for my father-in-law's memorial service, Julia's dad. His name was Marv Tanner. And, one of the interesting things about Marv's life was that relatively late in life, about 12 or 13 years ago, he was out working in his backyard, up 10 or 12 feet up on a ladder. And he fell off the ladder. And he broke both his legs, his pelvis, multiple bones throughout his body. And that became a life-changing event for Julia's dad. He, talk about forced into refuge or retreat, right? He embarked on a recovery that took years, but he actually did recover, and it was very slow and very painful. And for a while, he was completely paralyzed and couldn't do hardly anything. But he eventually worked himself back up to the point where he was able to walk around, and he could get around the house, and he could walk and move pretty much anywhere. And we even went on some trips and things like that. But I guess part of the reason that came to mind for me is that sometimes we don't have the choice in the matter. Sometimes things happen, and it puts us in that place of retreat or time out or refuge. And as I said, for Marv Tanner, it was a life-altering kind of experience. And at that point, he had to decide, how am I going to spend the rest of my life? What am I going to do with my life, and how do I piece together an existence? Bishop Robert Schnase tells the story of being snowed in an airport for 2 or 3 days. He says he watched over the hours as 14 consecutive flights, which he would have been on, were canceled one by one. During that time, he ate hotel sandwiches, he read a paperback novel he had purchased, he canceled all his upcoming appointments, pacing and talking on his cell phone until his cell phone died. Finally, Bishop Schnase said he remembered a time when he was churning and churning to make things happen, and it was in a situation where he didn't have any control, and someone said to him, "Robert, don't just do something, sit there." Robert, don't just do something, sit there. And we've all had experiences like Bishop Schnase, right? In fact, that's exactly what Luther was faced with at Wartburg Castle. In such circumstances, a couple of learnings occur. First, we do what we are able to do. We do what we're able to do, knowing that God will use that. And second, we also know that God's strength is greater than our own. And so there's an element of trust in all of that. We do what we're able to do, knowing that God will use that, and we know that God's strength is greater than our own. While there at the castle, what Luther could do was write. And so he used that time. He wrote a bunch of different works during that 10 months or so that he was there. And he also used that time to translate the entire New Testament and the book of Psalms into German. That Bible translation would have influence for hundreds of years. And for the first time, the German people could read the Bible in their own language. That was revolutionary. That was a remarkable achievement. And it wouldn't have happened had Luther not been forced into retreat. Some of the youth groups I've been a part of over the years have a favorite game. And the game is called Capture the Flag. And some of you know that game. And the best way to play that game is in a big park-like setting with lots of trees and bushes and things, right? Well, as you know, Capture the Flag is a running game. And when you run into the other team's territory, suddenly you're wide open. You could be chased. You could be tagged. You could be thrown in jail. That's part of Capture the Flag as well, right? The entire time you're in the other team's territory, there's constant pressure. You're trying to get near the flag. You're trying to get the flag, not be seen, possibly being chased. When you're being chased, there's no time to think about strategy, what you're trying to do. There's no time to think about the big picture. If you're being chased, there's only one safe place in Capture the Flag. One place where you can rest. One place where you can get a larger perspective, and that's back in your own territory, back in your home territory. When Jesus asks his followers in this passage today to come to a deserted place and rest a while, the Greek word used for rest in our passage literally means to be exempt, to have an intermission. I think of it as safe on base. Might be another way of putting it, right? We're safe in this little spot. That's what happens when we're in home territory. We're exempt. We're pulled out of the normal pressures, and that's what happened to Luther. Being safe on base doesn't mean we're out of the game. It just gives us a resting place, a place to get a larger perspective. Jesus is telling us that we can find this kind of rest, an exemption for our souls, a larger perspective than simply our day-to-day struggles. In our study book, Pastor Rob Fuquay tells the story of trying to find a choir director for his church. To make a long story a lot shorter, he asked one person 3 different times, and they politely refused each time. Soon afterwards, Pastor Rob was on a vacation, and he was holding a lot of stress and anger and just turmoil because the church was in turmoil about not having that choir director. And he was all alone, and he was driving along a deserted highway out around sunset. And at one point, he just pulled the car off to the side of the road. And he just got out of the car, and he just sat and he watched an eagle soaring around some mountain peaks and picking up on the currents and floating on the currents of air. And he watched for 15 minutes or more, and he felt God's presence in that moment. And he was completely at peace. And when he got back in the car and returned to the road, he no longer felt that stress, that angst, that anger that he had felt previously. He was completely at peace, and he believed that to be a gift from God. God had given him a gift of taking that away from him. While I'm not sure this is the most incredible part of the story, what I'm about to tell you, Pastor Rob says that when he returned home, the person that he had asked to be the choir director 3 times finally accepted his offer and came and worked for them for 10 years or something like that. But I think the bigger point, was that God moved in his life through a time of refuge, through a time of getting away, through a time of kind of intermission, being exempt, safe on base. Fuquay's example is a good illustration of letting go and letting God work. But what about those who don't have vacation time? What about those of you who may be caring for a spouse who is ill? What about those of you who care for an elderly parent? What about parents of young children or babies? Do they ever get time off? Not really. Really, if you think about it. And so the rest, and indeed our connection to God, comes, I think, not in a dropping everything else kind of way. Our refuge, I think, often comes in the midst of everything else. Our refuge comes in the midst of everything else. Looking at the teachings of Jesus, it's clear that we're called to be in this world, to be engaged, to live and act in this world. We're supposed to be going about our daily tasks, working at a job, visiting shut-ins, listening to a friend, helping the homeless, celebrating a birthday, singing during our worship service, just doing those things that matter each day. Those are good things. That's part of what we're all about. So it seems to me we need to find our refuge, our home base in the midst of those things. We need to find that place of intermission, being exempt, the place where we can get that larger perspective. I've shared this with some of you before, but some of you know Robert Fulghum, the author. He loves to tell the story of Lovey. Lovey was an African-American housekeeper who worked at his family's home when he was a boy. Fulghum loved Lovey because over the years she taught him a lot about life, including, he says, how to swear and how to spit and how to chew tobacco, So Fulghum admired her for that. But Lovey was also very strict, and she was very precise in her ways. And one day when Robert Fulghum was in high school, he came home one day, and Lovey announced to him very directly that it was time for him to iron his own shirts. Now, some of you remember, I've shared this in the past, that Robert Fulghum's detailed description of how he irons a shirt with painstaking detail, and he talks about putting this here, and you're going along here, and then you put the sleeve over like this, and then you get the collar, and you kind of go along the collar, and he's got the the spray bottle and the starching and the bluing and all this kind of stuff. And he goes on, he gives this description. It goes on for 3 pages. And so I'm going to save you all that. I'm not going to read those 3 pages. But then at the end, Fulgham says this. He says, whatever success or failure I've had at whatever else I've tried to do, in my heart, I hold this rock-solid fact. At least I can iron a shirt right. A shirt that could be put in the Shirt Ironing Hall of Fame. Fulgham continues. He says, I recall the details of ironing a shirt because that is still the way I do it. To this day, he says, I usually iron my own shirts because it gives me great pleasure, he says. The kind of pleasure and connection to God that any of us can experience when doing routine things. Weeding in the garden, chopping wood, shaving, taking a bath, knitting, baking bread, hanging sheets out on the clothesline. Sure, sometimes these activities are just routine, mundane tasks, but as often as not, we use these times to reflect and talk to God, to meditate, to pray. Just because you aren't on your knees in church, Fulgham says this, just because you aren't on your knees in church doesn't mean you can't be talking to God. And just because both you and God are busy doesn't mean you can't be in touch. Such times are the sacred parts of our lives. As we go forth today, let's remember that we don't have to be falsely kidnapped to find a place to rest a while. In fact, we don't even have to stop our daily lives or activities. Let's remember people like Robert Fulgham, who teach us that we can find God or become aware of God even as we continue our work and our activity in the world. In doing so, our souls find a place to rest. Our souls find home base. Our souls are made aware that this daily grind is not all that there is. There are glimpses of a larger perspective, a larger reality, which are times of refuge with God. I'm going to ask our music team to come forward right now. As they're coming forward, let's bring our hearts together in a time of prayer. Would you pray with me? Loving God, Martin Luther did not use his time of refuge as an avoidance of what you were calling him to do. He trusted that you would continue to move in his time of stillness. We know that our lives are built around many important responsibilities and relationships. But before and beyond all of them, there was and is you. Help us to know that you are always present, that we can approach you even in the midst of our daily tasks and obligations. We can seek to love you with heart, soul, mind, and strength, even as we go about our work in this world. For we know, Lord, that when we place you first, all of the other parts of our lives will assume their proper place. We ask this in the name of the one who is always mindful of you, the one who provides true rest for our souls, your Son Jesus. In his name we pray this. Amen. I'm going to invite our ushers to come forward. As they're coming forward right now, let's be prepared to receive our morning offering.
In your heart of hearts, there is a voice. It speaks from truth and not from choice. It sees it all, not just in parts. Deep inside your heart of hearts, a secret place known to your soul, where you can't hide, but you can go when it's all too much and you fall apart. There's a state of grace called your heart of hearts. Just listen to your life, it's talking to you. There'll always be a light that's running through you, flowing from a well that never runs dry. When you're at the point, down on your knees, you can find your weakness can be your strength, 'cause where one is, the other starts, deep inside your heart of hearts. Just listen to your life, it's talking to you. There'll always be a light that's running through you, flowing from a well that never runs dry. In your heart of hearts, there is a voice. It speaks from truth and not from choice. It sees it all, not just in parts. Deep inside your heart of hearts. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Righteous and holy in all of your ways, we come before you with honor and praise, here to adore you for all of our days. We come before you with honor and praise. Lord of the heavens, how faithful you are. Shine down upon us, O bright morning star. Righteous and holy in all of your ways, we come before you with honor and praise.
Amen. Please be seated. We move now into our time of prayer. And as we do, I want to mention some folks that we are holding in prayer. Katrina's back today. We're grateful. Katrina, welcome. It's great to have Katrina with us. Gerda Larson, you'll see Gerda's name there in your bulletin, but I understand she's doing better? Doing some better, yeah. Of course, you see lots of names there in your bulletin, and Dorothy Edwards and Doug Craig battling cancer, and so many others that are listed there. We hope that you will keep those folks in your prayers, not just today, but throughout the week as you are in your daily prayers. Keep all of those folks in prayer. Let's bring our hearts together right now as we come together in a time of prayer. Holy God, we are so grateful for your Spirit and the love we experience as we gather together. We come this day from different situations and circumstances, and each person here brings their prayers to you. Some here are tired, some are joyful, some are celebrating, some may be filled with stress or worry or concern. Speak to each of us here, renew our hearts, revitalize us with the warmth that you can bring. Forgive us and restore us with your healing strength. Lord, on many days we are slow to trust. We are slow to open ourselves to you. This morning, speak to us. Help us to know that you would have us live in joyful expectation. You would have us watch and listen for your presence, and indeed to seek it out. As we do so, remind us that we can find refuge and rest in you, even while going about our weekly tasks and responsibilities. Lord, you have heard the prayers that I have mentioned aloud. You know others that are upon the hearts of each person here this morning. We know that you take those prayers unto yourself. Lord, during our communion time today, help each of us to open ourselves to your guidance. And as we come to your table this morning, may we experience your strength, your forgiveness, and your healing presence. Help us to watch and listen as we share together now the prayer that your beloved Son taught us to pray by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. We move now into that time where we celebrate the Lord's Supper, and we gather once again at the table. Whenever we celebrate the Lord's Supper together, we are like that group of disciples who sat at table with Jesus on the night that he was betrayed. It was on that night, as Jesus shared the Passover meal with them, that he took the bread of that meal and he gave it a brand new meaning. After giving God thanks and praise, he broke the bread and gave it to his disciples, saying, Take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. Whenever you do this, remember me. And then again, after supper, Jesus took the cup. And after giving God thanks and praise, he gave it to his disciples, saying, Drink this, each of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, shed for you and for many, for the forgiveness of sin. Whenever you drink of this, remember me. And so today, as we gather, we do remember. We remember in a way that brings the very presence of the risen Christ back into our midst. Just as we share this one cup, we are reminded of our oneness in Christ, our connection to God, our connection to one another, our connection to the people who will worship here at 6 o'clock tonight. And just as we share bread that has been broken, we are reminded that each one of us comes before God broken in some way, in need of God's love, in need of God's hope, in need of God's forgiveness, in need of God's healing touch. So we come to the table in that spirit. I'm going to invite our communion helpers to come forward right now, and we'll take just a couple of moments so that I can serve them. And then following that time, I invite all of you to come now and share this feast that has been prepared for all of God's children. My friends, the bread of life given for you, the cup of God's love and forgiveness shared with you. Receive and give thanks. Hang on just a minute, okay?
There is only one God. There is only one King. There is only one body. That is why we sing. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together in love. There is only one God. There is only one King. There is only one body. That is why we sing. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together in love. There is only one God. There is only one King. There is only one body. That is why we sing. There is only one God. There is only one King. There is only one body. That is why we sing. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together with cords that cannot be broken. Bind us together, Lord, bind us together, Lord, bind us together in love.
Thank you, music team. Appreciate that as leading us through our communion time. Got a little warm in here because we can't turn the heat off for some reason, so it's just the heat's deciding it just wants to keep going, so we're turning it off, but it's not turning off. Anyway, thank you all so much for being here this morning. Great to have you with us. I'm going to invite you to stand so we can all be together for our sending forth, our benediction. My friends, go now in peace. Love God and serve the people. And may our God, the God who allows us to find that rest, that refuge, that home base for our souls in the midst of our daily activities. May that God go with you now and through this coming week. Go in God's peace, go in God's presence, and go in God's grace. Amen.
I saw the light. No more darkness, no more night. Now I'm so happy, no sorrow inside. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. Amen. 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 Sing it. Amen. Hallelujah. Amen. See the light. Amen. 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 That was fun.